Hytale, unlike games like Minecraft, will have a story mode that you can play through. As it is more like an RPG, it will also have bosses. These bosses should have unique traits and abilities that will make each one feel unique and like a different experience. Think of how memorable bosses in games like Terraria or Hollow Knight are. This is because these bosses are unique and must be beaten in different ways. So, what makes a boss special? For a good example, let's look at a boss at the start of Hollow Knight, the False Knight. This boss is the first for most players, so it clearly shows how boss fights will work for the rest of the game. The False Knight has 3 phases. In the first phase, it has a basic attack, where it leaps into the air and slams its mace down, forcing the player to dodge. It has cooldowns in between that allows the players to rush in and damage it. Once it has taken enough damage, it falls over and the weak spot appears. In Phase 2, the False Knight continues to do the same moves, although the delay in between them might be a bit shorter. But this time during some attacks, barrels fall from the ceiling and the player is forced to dodge them and keep fighting. Again, the False Knight is eventually knocked to the ground, takes damage, and goes to the next phase. In Phase 3, the False Knight gets even more erratic, and barrels are almost constantly falling, increasing the difficulty of the fight. Once the False Knight is beaten again, it falls through the floor where it can be finished off. So, looking at this boss fight, what can we learn from it? Well, we can first talk about the important pieces needed for a good boss fight. First of all, an interesting boss must have phases, each more difficult than the next. Second, the boss must have unique attacks. This will make each boss different from the next and in turn more memorable. Last, weak spots in between attacks. This pattern in a boss fight makes it more engaging and fun for the player. Okay, before we talk about scaling bosses to multiple players, let's make a Hytale boss. We will use the Yeti boss from the trailer. From what we know, let's make 3 phases for him. The first phase will just be him swinging his fist down at the player. The player must dodge this attack and use this time that his fist is stuck in the ground to attack his legs, which is his first weak spot. After enough damage is done to the Yeti, it moves on to the next phase, to which it grabs snowy rocks from the ground and throws them at the player. It won't be any more difficult to dodge these, but they will inflict more damage. In the final phase, the Yeti will grab a giant icicle and use this as a club. This will be harder to dodge as it will be in sweeping attacks and will be very difficult to get close to the Yeti without being hit. One solution to this final phase is to use a bow and arrow to shoot the Yeti's face, which is its other weak spot. As a single player boss fight, this would be pretty fun, but how do we scale it up for 2 to 4 players? For scaling, we will try to stay away from the boring methods, such as just scaling the boss's health. Although scaling the boss's health can still be done, it alone will not make the fight more interesting. Maybe we can break down this fight a bit more to find the parts that we can scale up. For example, in the first part of the fight, maybe the Yeti has more than one attack. Sometimes it just slams one fist down, sometimes both, and sometimes it'll leap into the air for extra force. In the single player boss fight, this can be its sub-phases, in which it mostly does the first attack, and as it gets more damaged, it switches to the second, and maybe the leap is the last attack before it switches into its second phase. But, if you play with more players, this can change. Instead, when playing 2 to 3 players, it will switch to the two-handed attack sooner, and maybe have multiple leap attacks near the end. If you are playing with 4 or more players, then it will switch to the leap attack even sooner, and might not even do the one-handed attack. The health can still be scaled to make sure that the groups of players don't power through the phases too fast, but these health increases shouldn't make the boss too difficult. The Hytale team might want to make it so that playing with groups of friends is still a little easier, so they can convince people to do boss fights together, which is always more fun. This scaling system can work in other ways as well. If there is a boss fight that can happen anytime in the game, it is possible that the boss fight can scale depending on the player's gear, as Hytale is not level-based. Although this will mean more work on bosses for the game, at the end of the day they aren't making wasted content. a single player playing the game will still experience these sub-phases, just only once or twice. I feel like a system like this would make these bosses unique while still letting anywhere from 1 to 4 players experience a boss fight without it being too easy or hard. All in all, I have a feeling that the Hytale team knows what they're doing and will make these boss fights a really fun experience. I'm sure that Hytale will be fun when you're playing by yourself and when playing with your friends. If you have any questions or more ideas for boss fights or boss fight phases, leave them in the comments. The music in this video is again by Slamma, who is almost at 1,000 subscribers, so go help him out. Hope you enjoyed the video, and thanks for watching.